In the summer of 1940, as Europe collapsed beneath the weight of German blitzkrieg and the fall of France became not just a military defeat, but a psychological shock for an entire continent, Britain found itself standing at a moment where every decision became a matter of national survival. The army that returned from Dunkirk had left behind most of its heavy equipment. Nazi flags now flew across the continent, and on the other side of the Channel the Luftwaffe struck British cities relentlessly. At this moment Britain possessed neither numerical superiority nor abundant resources, yet surrender was never an option for Winston Churchill. Instead of accepting weakness, he sought a new path, a method of war that would not rely on massive armies but on striking the enemy's mind. He envisioned a force capable of creating destruction far beyond its size, a force born not from conventional doctrine but from necessity, and it was in this desperate atmosphere that an entirely new form of warfare began to take shape. Under this new vision, Britain decided it would no longer fight the enemy according to the enemy's rules but would create its own, replacing large formations with small, fast, and lethal teams whose purpose was not occupation but disruption. These soldiers would exist to strike and disappear, to destroy installations rather than hold territory, and to spread fear rather than seek glory. They emerged from the sea under cover of darkness, sabotaged ports, railways, and supply depots, and vanished before German forces could respond. Through these actions, a relatively small force transformed the entire occupied coastline into a source of constant anxiety, forcing Germany to defend everywhere at once and turning security itself into an illusion. These men were not simply trained but completely rebuilt. In the harsh mountains and frozen valleys of Scotland they were tested beyond ordinary limits, where mental resilience mattered as much as physical strength. They learned to function while exhausted, hungry, and exposed to live ammunition. Training was so unforgiving that deaths occurred before combat ever began, yet those who endured emerged transformed. They became soldiers capable of navigating in total darkness, killing silently, and making independent decisions without waiting for orders. These men were shaped to act, adapt, and survive where conventional soldiers would falter. When these commandos first struck the coasts of Norway and France, German commanders struggled to comprehend the threat they represented. Factories burned, ships sank, rail lines were severed, and then silence returned as suddenly as the attack had begun. There were no front lines, no decisive battles, only damage and disappearance. This forced German planners into a defensive posture, compelling them to garrison ports, guard bridges, and fortify every vulnerable point. In spreading its forces thin across vast areas, Germany began weakening itself through its own attempts at control. After each raid, German reports repeated the same observations, describing attacks that were sudden, coordinated, and executed by an enemy that could not be traced. This deeply unsettled the Wehrmacht, whose doctrine was built around mass formations and predictable engagements. These raiders ignored established conventions, striking only where defenses were weakest and leaving before retaliation was possible. The psychological strain on German occupation troops grew steadily, eroding confidence and creating a sense of permanent vulnerability among soldiers assigned to supposedly secure areas. For Adolf Hitler, this became more than a military problem and evolved into a personal and ideological affront. The idea that a small volunteer force could repeatedly humiliate Germany's powerful military apparatus was intolerable. Out of this anger and frustration emerged an order rooted not in law but in vengeance, transforming execution into official policy and discarding the rules of war entirely. By issuing this command, Germany crossed a moral boundary that would later define its guilt, ensuring that defeat was no longer only military but historical. The intention behind this order was to instill fear among the commandos, yet the result was the opposite. These were men who had volunteered knowing death was a constant possibility, who trained under conditions where survival was never guaranteed. For them, the threat of execution changed nothing, because they had already accepted that each mission might be their last. Despite this knowledge, they continued to operate with discipline and professionalism, refusing to abandon the principles that separated soldiers from murderers. As the war progressed, these commandos evolved into integral components of major Allied offensives without losing their identity. On D-Day, they landed at the forefront, securing bridges, capturing key positions, and opening routes for advancing forces. They no longer operated solely as raiders but as force multipliers, shaping the direction of entire operations through speed, initiative, and precision. Wherever they fought, the tempo of battle changed in favor of the Allies. The legacy of the British Commandos extended far beyond victory in the Second World War. They laid the foundation for modern special forces across the globe, influencing doctrines centered on adaptability, initiative, intelligence gathering, and psychological dominance. Their methods prove that wars are not won solely by numbers or equipment but by creativity, flexibility, and the ability to think faster than the enemy under pressure. This story is not merely one of raids and operations but of character. A nation that stood alone chose innovation over despair, creating a force that could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight a stronger enemy. These men fought not only to destroy targets but to send a message that Britain remained unbroken and determined. Their actions embodied resolve, discipline, and the refusal to accept defeat even in the darkest moments. In the end, despite all its power, the German military never found an effective answer to this force. Its response was brutality, which history ultimately judged as evidence of failure. The British Commandos, by contrast, became a lasting symbol of courage, professionalism, and moral strength. This is why Germany feared them more than any other Allied unit, because they fought not only with weapons but with ideas, discipline, and determination, qualities for which Germany had no counter and could never defeat.